Joining me now, Labor MP Josh Burns and Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson. Welcome to you both, and you're both in lockdown in Victoria, of course. So thanks for tuning in. Look, I want to start with the lockdown. Opposition leader Anthony Albanese came out this morning laying the blame for the recent Melbourne outbreak on the federal government, slamming their inability to get purpose-built quarantine facilities built. Have a listen.
We know there have been 21 separate outbreaks from hotel quarantine. Hotels were built for tourists, they weren't built as medical facilities.
Sarah Henderson, what's your response to this? Is this outbreak because the federal government hasn't built a quarantine facility?
Well, Sherry, good evening. Great to join you. And I don't think I've heard Anthony Albanese say one positive thing in 18 months. So it's really disappointing to see this narrative of negativity continue. The bottom line is that the states are responsible for quarantine, and we are supplementing that responsibility with Howard Springs, of course. And in Victoria, Sherry, we have made a very important agreement in principle with the Victorian government to develop a quarantine facilities, purpose-built, state-of-the-art, which I very much hope will be at Avalon Airport.
Josh, why is the Victorian government simply unable to handle COVID-19 when the rest of the states, for the most part, have continued on managing perfectly fine?
Well, good evening, Shari, and good evening, Sarah. I think that what we've seen over the last year is 21 separate outbreaks from hotel quarantine. So 21 different occasions where different states and territory governments have had to manage outbreaks and try and contain it within the community. And what we've seen is lockdowns in Perth, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, in Sydney, and of course in Melbourne. And you don't have to remind me about the difficulty of lockdowns. I'm currently living through the latest one. And yeah, there's no denying the lockdowns have been devastating for Victorians. But I'm also really pleased to see the extremely amazing and proactive response from Victorians. We've had thousands and thousands of people come forward. We're leading the nation in vaccines, and we're leading the nation in terms of testing numbers as well. So, look, it's a challenge, and it's frustrating given this happened and originated from an outbreak in hotel quarantine in Adelaide. But Victorians are getting on with it, and hopefully we're out of lockdown as quickly as possible.
Sarah, I mean, one thing that isn't discussed, these lockdowns are to prevent deaths and loss of life from COVID-19, but it's not often discussed just the true extent of the loss of life from people who are taking their own lives because of the mental illness that's associated with the rolling lockdowns, particularly in Melbourne, which has had now, is it 5 lockdowns? I mean, was it 8 or 9 months of last year Victorians were in lockdown?
Well, Sherry, I have raised concerns about the lockdowns in Victoria, particularly in regional Victoria. For instance, we've not had one incident or case of community transmission in regional Victoria at all, and yet the entire regions right across Victoria were locked down last week. And there's a coalition of chambers of commerce, including in Geelong, Ballarat and Bendigo, who have called for action on these lockdowns. They want to see the Victorian government doing things differently. This is causing such hardship for businesses, for workers, and including for people with mental health challenges. We do know that there is a report apparently indicating that there's been a surge of mental health challenges for young people. We're very concerned about that. But as you know, Sherry, as a government, we continue to work with the Victorian government, but we want to see the Victorian economy open as quickly as possible and, of course, as safely as possible. And our vaccine rollout, our testing, and all the work we are doing to protect the safety and health of Victorians and all Australians is obviously paramount.
Okay. Josh, I want to turn to the Israeli government, or the new government that looks to be forming as Benjamin Netanyahu's term is coming to a close, 12 years this term and 15 in total. Josh, what do you think his achievements have been? What will his legacy be? And do you think the very absurd makeup of this new Israeli coalition will work?
Well, Shari, I mean, I actually think it's quite a good thing that the Israeli government, the new Israeli government that will be, that's got to go through its final stage of a vote through the Knesset, is made up of people right across the political spectrum. It's made up of the Labour and the Meretz Party, which is the equivalent of the Israeli Greens. It's made up of centrist parties. It's made up of people in the more conservative side of Israeli politics. It's also got the United Arab Party, which is headed by Mansour Abbas, who has indicated that, and it's the first Arabic party to join an Israeli government in decades. So I think that's a really positive thing. I think it's something that shows that Israel's a vibrant country and has many different voices and requirement for many different voices in representation. And in regards to the outgoing Prime Minister, I mean, he's been a huge figure in Israeli politics. He's the longest-serving Prime Minister. I think, for me, the most positive thing he's done, or one of the most positive things he's done, was bring Israel into peace with 4 different countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and also Morocco, which are historic and something that is certainly welcome.
That is, pioneering those relationships with nations in the Middle East, it'll be one of his lasting legacies. And he did that, of course, with the United States' help, with Trump's help in recent years as well. Sarah, what do you think about the new government and, Benjamin Netanyahu's achievements? He was a controversial figure, but repeatedly was voted in. It's a complex democratic system over there.
Well, Sherry, it is indeed, and I largely agree with everything Josh has said. He is a larger-than-life figure. He has made an extraordinary contribution to peace. He has made an extraordinary contribution on the international stage. But for us as a government, we will deal with the new coalition in the same way that we have dealt with the outgoing Prime Minister. We are, of course, very hopeful that peace can be maintained. That is obviously a huge priority for the Morrison government. But if I look at Israel and all that it's achieved, the thing that to me has been such a standout is the way it has led the charge in innovation also. It's achieved so much in terms of its innovation, its development of IP, the impact that it's made around the world. And I trust that will continue also.
Josh, Greg Sheridan wrote a really fascinating piece this weekend in the Weekend Australian, where he said that often criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism in disguise. What do you think of that?
Well, the Labor Party has a clear position on this, as many other countries in the world do. And I think Switzerland was the latest country to adopt the IRA definition on anti-Semitism, which clearly defines what is anti-Semitism and what is appropriate and reasonable criticism of the Israeli government. And the Israeli government is a staunch democracy. They've had 4 elections in 2 years. There's no doubt that democracy is robust, perhaps a little too robust. But what the IRA definition does do is clearly differentiate between what is a difference of opinion on the Israeli government and what is anti-Semitism. And if you are, what we saw throughout the conflict, Shari, a couple of weeks ago between Israel and Hamas was many Jewish businesses and students and people around the world, in Melbourne, in Madrid, in Europe, in New York, were targeted as a result, as if they were somehow responsible for the actions of the Israeli military or the Israeli government. And that is what the IRA definition goes to, and it's clearly an important line, and that's something the Labor Party fully adopted and fully supports. I don't think the government has yet, but obviously we would be welcoming if the government did adopt the IRA definition as well.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say that no one in the government would have a problem with confusing anti-Israel sentiment with anti-Semitism, whereas figures in the Labor Party might have that problem. Sarah Henderson, Josh Burns, thank you both very much for your time this evening.